And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hour podcast. I'm super excited today because I'm here with Meg Smith, AI enthusiast and mentor in the 90-day mentoring challenge. Really helped me in my career, and I think she's going to provide a ton of value for you all at home. Meg, how are you doing?
I'm so good. We were just saying how it's so confusing that our time zones are almost opposite. It's evening for me in winter and it's kind of getting a bit cozy and dark. And I think it's the opposite for you.
Complete opposite. Yeah, the sun's finally coming out. We got a bit of a drizzly week next week, but in general, it's looking a bit more promising in the UK.
My mum's visiting my brother in the north of England at the moment, and she said she's seeing people in shorts and t-shirts, and she's like still bundled
We're
up
ri- Look,
by comparison.
we're absolutely ridiculous. I apologize for all Brits everywhere. Like, for example, my girlfriend's Portuguese and we go to Portugal and it's like freezing cold for them. They're in jackets and they're like out and they're in the car. They can't walk around. And we're out seeing Brits in like shorts and t-shirts. Some of them don't even have a shirt on. They're just walking
Yeah.
around. And my girlfriend's parents are like, are they stupid? And I'm like, no, they're not stupid. They're just British. And that's how we are. A little bit of sun and we're out literally shorts, t-shirt, sliders, everything.
There is nowhere better than London on a sunny day. Like
Yeah.
I honestly, it's also the palpable joy, right, of people, of the sun worshippers that are like, it's here. People drinking, in parks and along the river. I just remember when we moved in summer, and it was like 4 weeks of this like beautiful, like we were completely lulled into a false sense of security, but it was amazing. Completely can't beat London on a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to ask you about London because the way you and Mark talk about it, it seems like, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the place where a lot of change for both of you in your career and your life happened. And we'll definitely get into that. But I've got my first question here because I'm super impressed by this because I know how difficult it can be to write a book. And you have written one and published one. It's called Lost Heart Found. And I'm curious to ask kind of, I haven't read it, so kind of what the content of the book is and what inspired you to write it in the first place.
Yeah, I sometimes forget that I wrote that book, but I am so proud of it. I also have to like a little bit embarrassingly admit that I wrote a memoir when I was 27. Um, but it is a memoir. It is my experience or what I did to make sense of losing my dad. My dad passed away when I was 24. And I'm the youngest of three and the only girl, and he really treasured me. We had a really special relationship. And so losing him, it just really knocked me as honestly grief does. And I think I can remember at the time being really annoyed. Like I was like, grief is this universal experience that everyone will have at some point. But I was so unprepared for it. And I felt like after the initial, things that happen straight away after someone dies, it kind of goes from conversation unless the people that would bring it up actually were people who themselves had lost someone or experienced some kind of grief. And it was, yeah, as I say, I was 27, so it was a few years later, but it was really writing the book was an outworking of understanding that grief. But I also, in processing that loss, took a sabbatical with my husband Mark, and actually, it's kind of you can't write it. We lost four people in our close family. So his mum, his brother-in-law, and his nephew, and my dad all passed within 12 months of each other. And so we needed to get away and kind of figure out. It was a little bit of carpe diem, I suppose, of like figure out what life is about. There were a whole bunch of things on our bucket lists for travel. We'd always had this real like itchy feet desire to travel. Um, and so we actually took the money that we had been saving as a house deposit and decided and saved for another year, and then decided to really go and do some of those things that we wanted to do. We basically moved them from the someday list to the tomorrow list. They were things like, riding the Trans-Siberian Railway from Vladivostok to Moscow and the train up to St. Petersburg. We walked across Spain. We did the Camino de Santiago. We just had these experiences that, really were transformational. And the book came about at the end of that year because I think as long as alongside those transformational and like really joyful and like core memory experiences, my grief was with me. And I still had times when I was really miserable and really concerned about, where my life was going and how I felt. And so when we spent some time in Dubrovnik, in Croatia. We spent a month there in November, which was beautiful because it was like right as everything was slowing down. It was, the cruise ships had finished and it was getting cooler. And it was really the first time that we had stopped. We were there for a month. It was the first time in the year that we had stopped for a long period of time. And I read this book. I can't even remember the name of it. I should remember the name of it. But it was basically I remember this concept that the author had. It was to say that when she committed to herself about writing, it was how to be a writer. She would come up with consequences or disincentives to like make sure she kept her commitments to herself. And that really resonated with me because I tried the reward system and I just let myself off. I just would go, I don't really want that reward anyway, whatever I'd sort of promised myself. But she set a consequence for herself if she didn't meet her writing commitment to herself in a day, that she would donate money to a cause that was like absolutely against her values. She would donate $1,000 to the KKK. And like you read it and you're like, oh. So not only would she have let herself down, she would have also actively supported an organization that she finds their values, and I do as well, absolutely abhorrent. And so I sat with that for a bit, and I'd had this item on my bucket list to write a book since I was 18. I'd written that on my bucket list. And I thought, this is it. I've got all these wonderful experiences. I'm just going to, maybe no one will ever read it, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to write 1,000 words every day. They don't have to be good words. I'm going to write 1,000 words every day. And the first day that I don't meet my 1,000 words, I'm going to have this consequence. And it sounds really silly because like money makes the world go round. But at the time I was like, I think I would buy myself out of most things. Like maybe I didn't want to come up with like an equivalent thing money-wise, but I loved the inspiration of like something that was really against your values. And at the time there was this is a long-winded story, by the way. At the time there
Not at
was
all.
a sports journalist in New Zealand who his name had started to come up in the news a lot. This is back in 2017, and he had been on the TV when I was like a kid, and he would host this rugby talk show, and he was like really affable guy, TV personality, and then there was this big scandal, and it turned out he had really horrifically beaten his partner, and he had lost his job and had the consequences of what he had done. And then it was a few years later, and all these Facebook commentaries and posts were starting to say like, oh, he's getting another chance. They're going to give him a show, and he's kind of coming back into the limelight. And I knew that his partner was still living with the effects of what he had done to her. And it just made my blood absolutely boil every time, to the point where I had done the setting on Facebook where it was like, don't show me this. Don't show me stuff about this person or this topic, because it's, I just didn't want to see it. Anyway, what I came up with as my consequence if I missed a day's writing was that I would have to like his page on Facebook and post a really public, really like heartfelt message of support to say I really felt like he should have another chance, and he's really just misunderstood. And like honestly, it sounds someone said to me, well, you just wouldn't do it, like you just like and the problem was I told Mark about it, so I knew that if I missed my own goal, he would hold me accountable and he would make me follow through on what I'd promised myself. And anyway, I must have hit on something that was like motivating enough to me, because there were nights where I was like, screaming in before midnight to get in my thousand words of my writing. And it meant that I was able to really, I think I started writing that book in December in London. We just arrived in London, and I published it in the February following. So it did sort of come together quite quickly. But I think if you count the year's travel of research, maybe it took, the full year.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. And there's so many topics there. And it's funny you talk about this balance between kind of pain and also pleasure of like, you can give yourself a reward. And a book I really like from, I don't know his name, James Clear, Atomic Habits, very famous book. I think it was one of the first self-help books I picked up. And he speaks about a reward system. But then I can't believe I'm quoting Tony Robbins in 2025, but he has a book, I believe it's called Awaken the Giant Within or something along those lines, and he speaks about the power of pain and how it kind of outweighs pleasure in a lot of ways. So it's funny that I do the same thing, and I've actually started a few weeks ago. My brothers, I have twin brothers younger than me. We have a group chat, and I told them if I'm not in the gym by 7 a.m. and I don't have a picture of me in the gym, I will send you £50. Done.
I love
And
that.
yeah, exactly. And believe me, my brother, you don't want to send my brothers £50. They'll give you crap for it. They'll make fun of you. They'll take pictures of them spending the money on stupid things. I didn't want to do it. So, yeah, I've never been more motivated for going to the gym. I have lost £50 on one day, and I'm never going to do it again. I remember I couldn't sleep. It was like 5 a.m. I woke up, I looked at my phone. I was like, I haven't had any sleep today. I usually get up at 6 to go to the gym. And I was like, I just sent them a message and I was like, guys, just enjoy your money. And I took a screenshot of me sending it to them. But other than that, I haven't missed a day and it's been really good. That is awesome, Meg.
I
So
love that. Can I just say one thing about Tony
please, no.
Robbins?
Yes,
So
please do.
when we were in Dubrovnik, so part of the reason why I think I was able to write the way that I did was because I'd spent that time of sabbatical reading more than I had in ages. I love
Hmm.
reading. We talked about a shared love of English. Like I loved English literature. That's what my degree is in. And when I started working, I never read anything but emails, right? So in this year off, one of the things I did was I tried to read a book a week. One of the books I read was by Tony Robbins called Money Master the Game. And I wanted to hate the guy. I'm like reading this book. It was pretty early. It was one of the first books I read in like my personal finance or financial literacy education. And I read this book, and he wrote this book after the 2008 stock market crash. And he went to the Warren Buffetts and the investment bankers and sort of said, you guys, you've got your money. So like I'm writing this book for all of the kids of the mom and pop investors who've lost all their wealth in the stock market crash. What would you tell your kids, or what would you tell? I think the question to Warren Buffett was, what would you tell your wife to do if you died? Like, how would you simplify investing for someone who hasn't invested before, but you really want them to do well? It's kind of what he went to them and said. And this book was a distillation of the advice that he got. And I read this book and I was really like, I was looking for, like, I was so cynical. But by the end of it, I was like, I couldn't fault a single thing. And then when I'd kind of conceded, actually, I really got so much out of this book in terms of financial literacy. Then at the end, it's like he doesn't even make any money off the book. It all goes to like a charity to feed the hungry. And he talks about his personal story with growing up hungry, basically, growing up in poverty. So yeah, I can't speak to all of it. I don't know quite why we have such a kind of shared cynicism, but for that experience. And then I went on and read other financial books, and they say the same thing. And I'm like, okay, like, I give the guy
Yeah.
credit. He's done some good work.
Yeah, it definitely starts piecing together. And when I was in university, I actually picked up that book, Money Master the Game. And I actually have a vivid memory of eagerly waiting for it because I ordered it on Amazon and it coming in. And I had like £100 in my bank account. I spent like 10 on the book. So I was so excited for it. I was like, this is going to make me rich. And I read through it. And I didn't finish it, but I think after this I'm going to because you've recommended it to me. But it's definitely sitting on that bookshelf somewhere. I can see it exactly next to the English dictionary, just waiting for me to eagerly. It's a bit of a compact book, isn't it? At least the one I've got.
Yeah,
But
so
it's
there's another book that is, I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically where he put all the advice, and then I think the feedback was like, it's way too much for most people. You need to do a version that's more digestible. So in classic form, Mark read that one as well, and then the other one, and I just read
yeah,
the cliff notes. I read the
yeah, yeah,
summary. But
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
there's a really great book also by, he's actually an Australian. It's called Barefoot Investor. And it's similar in philosophy to, I think, like the FIRE movement. which is, have you heard of that?
I haven't.
Well, it is financially independent, retire early, I think,
Okay.
is
Ooh, no,
one.
I
So we've,
have. I
have
have
you heard of?
actually. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah. I
have.
haven't
Yeah.
actually read much of that, but when I've spoken to friends who are into that, they and I talk about Barefoot Investor, they're like, yeah, that's the same idea. Or yeah, so I feel like it's that same thing we talk about all the time, right? A bit of curiosity, you learning your own circumstances and values, and taking in this learning approach to whatever it might be. And financial literacy has been a big one for me in gaining, I guess, freedom in my life as well.
Yeah, yeah. And let's talk about that because I had questions prepared, but I love the direction this conversation is going around freedom. So we spoke a little bit before we started the podcast around how important freedom is to you, and you've mentioned it in other podcasts and speaking gigs that you've done. Um, Firstly, what is your definition of freedom? Because I constantly see mine evolving. Like it's like the goalposts are always moving. Like firstly, it was freedom of income. Okay, I can pay my rent, etc. Okay, then it's freedom of location. I want to work from home as much as possible, and then I feel like it's just constantly evolving as we go. So, what is your definition of freedom now? I guess is the question I'm asking.
I love that question. And I agree with you, it's evolving. So I'll give you the definition now, and then maybe I can go back and talk a little bit about like how it became such an important value to me and Mark and our family. So right now we're living in that freedom. Mark and I are writing a book for Microsoft Press called The 12 C's of Copilot Adoption. And that is a book. So it's the first book deal that I've had with a publisher. My first book was self-published. And so I feel like I pitched the concept and they loved it and we got this deal. And then I was really like, okay, what do we do now? Like, and you hit that moment hits where you're like, how are we qualified to do this? I don't know about you, but as soon as I kind of get to do something big, there's a pause where I'm like, like, the voice maybe of doubt creeps in for a sec, and you're like
Absolutely.
a little bit of paralysis. But we've
Hmm.
burst through that recently, and what we've got this state of flow happening, and we're like going, okay, we're really moving through our drafts. But I said to Mark, do you know that actually, if we had jobs for other people, like we have had for most of our careers until the last 2 years, we would be doing this, as I know many authors in the community who write for Microsoft Press, because let's be honest, people do it for love and for commitment to the community and the technology and wanting to be writers, not necessarily for the money. But we would be doing it in our nights and our weekends. But because we have freedom to use our time how we see fit, we're able to do it commit a month, basically a month solid of both of our time coming back and forth on a particular concept and passing the draft back and forth. We're able to sort of say, like, this is our writing month of dedicated time. Whereas if we were like I worked for Google for 10 years, like that was a full more than a 9 to 5, right? It would have only been evenings and weekends, and I wouldn't have had the thought space or energy, especially with a young family, to do that. So we kind of acknowledged that to each other just this week. We were like, man, isn't it amazing? Not only that we get to do this work, but also that we can say this is what we can focus our time on at the moment. So for me, freedom is so much about what are you spending your time on? Who are you spending it with? How are you able to be the captain of your own ship and say, this is what I find is meaningful, and this is how I want to invest and sort of give into the world. This is what I want my legacy to be. And freedom was one of the very first things Mark and I talked about. We had just had our 15-year wedding anniversary in February. We've been together a really long time. And one of the first conversations we had, it was Mark said to me, hey, freedom's really important to me. And I think at the time, you could read that as like, oh, does he have problems with commitment? Like, what does he mean by freedom?
Yeah.
Um, but it was, obviously we talked about it at that time. And even then it was not being restricted, like you say, by, first of all, figuring out that freedom of financial independence, or the ability at least to make money that allowed you choices. and then also freedom of thought. And again, kind of maybe going more into those like freedom to define success according to your own values. And that's one of the things like that has changed my life. And I really encourage people like basically that I meet or that I mentor to take the time to understand their values so that they can come up with a definition of success that is in alignment with those values, not with their friends' values or even their family's values or their company's values. Although those things obviously are all interconnected. If you can really spend that time getting to know yourself and know what you value, then even if what you have might not be someone else's definition of success, you kind of don't care if it's yours. If you feel like you're winning, then you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And Meg, I feel like I'm always looking for practicality, and you've given a lot of gold there. And we've spoke about how freedom is, constantly evolving. So there's no real roadmap to get there. You mentioned kind of a really key step, which is understanding your personal values. If you had to give a roadmap for freedom, what would that look like?
Yeah. So I think I always start with values, and I didn't realize the importance of um, articulating and owning your own values until I'd done a values exercise a few times. But one
Mm.
of the books I always recommend is called Designing Your Life. And it is a book by a couple of design professors from Stanford. And they take this idea of sort of design concept of prototyping to your life and your career. And I read that at the time when I was, where were we? So we'd, after the sabbatical, Google rehired me and moved us to London, which was wonderful. Like, and probably why London, I feel like it's like a character in my life almost,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
always wanted to go there. It's very common for New Zealanders to spend some time in London. There's even whole areas where we're known to frequent in groups. In London. But also my auntie lived there when I was young, and she would send us, birthday cards with £10 notes. And, it was always this goal or this dream of mine. I thought I would go straight after school as part of an OE, but it didn't happen. And the gift from that sort of Google gave me was this opportunity to experience it later in my career, to go and be part of this amazing community there. And then obviously Mark got really involved in the dynamics community while we were in London, in the Power Platform community. And we still have some of our really close friendships with people we met during that time. I've lost track of, in my expressing my love for London, I've lost track of the question. Oh yeah, no,
No,
that was where I was when I was reading the book Designing Your
right,
Life.
right.
And because even though that there was so much of a dream come true experience of moving to London, actually the job that I was moved to do, so I was hired to do, they sunset the product like right after I got to London. So I had this
Mm.
like experience in my career at Google of really like not having a clear purpose. Google hires type A people who are like really achievement orientated, and then they have all these structures internally that encourage you to strive for more, you know, and that's really hard when you don't really have a concrete goal or a way to add value. And I remember a friend introduced me to her sister, who is this incredible communications expert, Kate Mason. I highly recommend following her on LinkedIn. She's got a book coming out too, actually. She had been at Google in comms and then had done some like amazing executive coaching, communications coaching in Silicon Valley in the US. And she would just like have these calls with me. She was amazing. She would just like spend time with me. And one of the books she recommended, yeah, Designing Your Life, she was kind of like, you can either try and solve the system, which is kind of out of your scope and above your pay grade, or you can spend the time going, okay, really understanding yourself and what you want to achieve. And what I loved about the book was it talks about so often when we're at this crossroads in our life or our career, or we feel like we need a change, our instinct is to do a big change, like oh, I'm going to quit my job and go study. I'm going to retrain. I'm going to take 3 years and become an accountant. Or, we make these big plays. We feel like we have to. But what if we took a prototyping approach to the changes that we might make? And I that really resonated with me because I think I was feeling like, oh, I just need to quit my job again, even though I kind of knew that didn't really solve everything. And there's real like things in life, like we've already
Hmm.
talked about, like money. Um, but it kind of starts with this values exercise and gets you to do some things like one I've still got is um, I've got like my handwritten notes of what I value and what success looks like for me. And funnily enough, what I had written back then in 2018 lines up a lot with what I'm doing now and how my life looks like. Um, but there's also like, they've got an exercise in there like write your obituary. What do you want people to be saying about you when you're dead? And it
Hmm.
was kind of morbid, but also quite freeing to go to delineate between what's really important, what I hope people remember me for, and what I hope they say about me versus maybe where I was putting my time and energy at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I did the same task because maybe a book you've read, very cliche, but one of the first self-help books I picked up, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, actually runs you through that exercise, right? And if you read books proactively, as it mentions in the book to do, you'd close the book and you'd write down what you'd like people to say about you. Kind of at your funeral, you imagine yourself attending your own funeral, and I think it's a very powerful exercise, so I highly recommend that if you're feeling lost in any way. And can I just say, I love the perspective that you've shown on calculated risk taking. I paraphrased it very much there, but I'm a guy, and we see a lot of stuff. I see a lot of stuff on my algorithm. I see a lot of business owners. I'm a huge fan of Alex Hormozy, as Mark is as well. Love his books, and love kind of the stuff he puts out there. And a lot of also, male and also female entrepreneurs can really push this narrative of, all right, you just need to drop it all, and you're just like, I can't really drop it all. I've got rent, I've got food I need to eat, I've got water bills I need to pay. There's just so many factors that are stopping you from taking that big jump. But I love the thought of incremental progress. Okay, hey, this is a risk, but I've kind of done all the work beforehand to make this a risk that's kind of worth taking right now, right? And I feel like that's a really important point to kind of think about, because we spoke about it before the podcast started. This week I'm kind of starting on my own. I have a contract that I've signed, which is really nice, and I'm kind of working on that. But for so long I thought, oh, I just need to quit my job, and in the end that's kind of what it was. But it made sense, and I feel like that's powerful, right? So I love what you said there.
And this is a classic. Like I haven't actually read the book, but Mark talks so passionately about books that I feel like I have. So the Atomic Habits book, correct me if I'm wrong, because you have read it. The concept's habit stacking, right? So
Hmm.
that it's easier to add new habits in and get those incremental gains when you attach them to something that you've already done and learned. Like, for example, brushing your teeth. Like, if you want to take a vitamin every day, do it when you brush your teeth because you probably brush your teeth without thinking, and then you add it in. And what has surprised me as I feel like in the last 2 years, so August 2023, no, yeah, August 2023, I left Google permanently, so to work for mine and Mark's business, Cloverbase, and that was a big leap for me. So, similar to what you've just made, it's giving up guaranteed income, it's given up, a little bit of surety because someone else is telling you what you're doing, and it was a calculated risk for me that I realized that when I went back to Google in 2018, I wasn't ready for. And actually, as much as I found there was times when I struggled with, not knowing what my job was and how to add value, I realized in hindsight that I learned a whole bunch of skills in that time and through those experiences that actually qualified me to then take a risk. As in that scenario, I was thinking, could I be an independent contractor and get enough work to not go back and take another salaried job, which was kind of my fallback. I was like, okay, well, if I need to if it doesn't work, if I'm wrong, if this is a lesson, then I will go back and I will apply for another job and find another job that can go back to a salary. But what surprised me, I think I could never have expected that how quickly I would see more opportunity than I could ever have imagined when I was a salaried worker. And I said this to a business mentor just the other day. Like I was a really good employee. I was like, yep, I was, motivated and I performed well and I did that so well. I had to learn entrepreneurial, thought processes and skills that I just never would have had the opportunity, or maybe the environment to learn while I stayed working for someone else. And now I'm so glad. Like it was a bit of push pull. We talked about some of the reasons why you left or you've decided to leave, and it kind of comes down to that freedom choice again. And it was the same for me. And I'm so glad because I see myself very differently now than what I did when I was still an employee. I think I'm capable of way more, and I am constantly trying to stretch my own understanding of myself and what's possible. So I feel like I said to that business mentor the other day, I was like, I've just had this great meeting with my accountant and like it's really good and we're going into the next year. I'm like, I feel like I'm like a toddler graduating to like primary school in the life of me as a business owner, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely a weird feeling. Like I remember sitting down, like it's funny we're having this call on Tuesday. Yesterday was the first day I started this, which was a Monday. I sat down at my desk and I was like now what? It was one of those feelings that we also spoke about of kind of what can I do now? What am I going to do now? Like, and I felt like the world was kind of open to me and I saw a lot more opportunity than I would have if I was still in full-time work. So it's definitely not for everyone. I feel like there are people with different circumstances in life. I feel like if that's what you want, you should go for it. And if it's not, then I feel like there's a lot of avenues. There's a lot of companies willing to pay you for the skills that you do. Probably if you're watching this podcast, Power Platform, Dynamics related. If not, probably a bit more technical. But yeah,
And
I mean,
that's exactly the point, right? Of defining success according to your own values and your own goals,
mm,
because there's so much to be said for what I learned when I was a salaried worker, for the connections I made, for the security and the choices it afforded me to make. So that is in alignment, I'm sure, with a lot of people's definitions of success. And one of the things that also, I think, if I was to say a roadmap, so you work out your values and what is important to you, and then the dreaming part is a little bit woo, a little bit, we're going back into Tony Robbins territory, but I honestly had like too many experiences of it works, and it's that law of attraction, right? So I'll give you an example. So when we were on that sabbatical trip, Mark and I, before we went to Dubrovnik, we were in Copenhagen in Denmark. And we did like a really geeky, because we're geeks, design thinking exercise about our lives. So we took Post-it notes and we're in the wall of this, like you could imagine, like a Scandinavian showroom type Airbnb. It was really beautiful furniture. And we desecrated the walls of Post-it notes, and we took, we had 3 ones there. So it was like 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years. Where do we want to be? Like what's the dream? What's the goal for each one? And we would take, for 1 year, we're like, hey, we're going to think about 1 year. So take 5 minutes each and just like write without talking to each other. And then we discussed like, this is where I'd like to be with my health. This is what I'd be liking to do, like was what I'd be like to learn. This is the countries I'd like to go to. We had all these different things, right? And we did that for 5 years and we did that for 10 years. We put things on there like, we'd like to have a home base in New Zealand in 5 years. We'd like to live near the coast. We'd like to still travel a lot. We had all these different things. And when we were was probably a year or so ago, I found some of the photos of the post-it notes, and I knew some, like I'm living in our home by the coast in New Zealand, so I obviously knew some of them had happened, but I didn't realize when I looked back at the number, like the post-it notes, there was about 90% of the things we'd written down that day that have actually happened now. We actually have those things. And they felt like really big, impossible dreams. Like we were living out of backpacks at that point and we didn't have like any clear idea of where we were going. But in taking the pressure off of, sometimes I think what stops us from dreaming is we don't want to disappoint ourselves, or we don't want to disappoint the people around us. But, there's a big like role that shame plays in our societies, right? Where it's like, oh, don't know, who do you think you are? Have you got a big head? Like what gives you the right to think that? And I really encourage you to rewrite the voice in your head, if that's what the voice is saying, to go, why can't I? Maybe I could. What would it look like if I did? Swap that narrative, because yeah, quite often I'll find old notebooks and I'm like, oh yeah, look at this. I found this in the notes app in my phone just the other day. I'd written this like affirmation around like the kind of life I wanted to live, where I wanted to be, what I wanted to be doing for work, how I wanted to be financially free. And I wrote that when we were in Dubrovnik in 2017, in November 2017. And I remember like expecting it to happen a year later. And I had written exactly how much income I wanted to be making. I had written down like all the stuff as a lot of those like, self-help books tell you to do. And I think at the time, about a year later, and I'm back in salaried work in London, and I'm like, you know what? It was a nice dream, kind of. I parked it. But then I came back to it. It was in the notes on my phone just a couple of months ago. And I read it, and it was like this crazy feeling going, got that, got that, got that, got that, got that, got that. And so it's given me even another data point from my own life to go, okay, maybe it's worth having the big dreams and maybe being a little bit relaxed on some of the timing, because Meg in 2018 called that plan or that dream a failure. I didn't get that. I failed. But actually, Meg in 2025 has all those things, and I still want all those things. So isn't that a win?
Yeah, yeah, I love that perspective. And we spoke about Alex Hormozy. Something he says is, if something's worth doing, it takes considerably longer than you first expect it to. And I think that's really powerful. And now it makes a lot of sense why in the mentoring challenge, yourself and Mark encourage at the beginning to write down your goals. That's like one of the first things he makes you do. And we had a bit of a powerful conversation with Mark, and I love him. I took a screenshot of the goals that I wrote because he made you write it in your own workbook. And then I sent it to him like a few months later, and I was like, that's happened. That's happened.
Yeah.
That's happened. Like, what you've done is very powerful. And I think it helped for him and maybe you to see that. And you see it so much throughout your program. But I think it's a very powerful exercise because it's crazy. I think people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 10. I think that's a Tony Robbins quote. We really need to stop quoting Tony Robbins at this point. I think it's too much for 2025.
Podcast.
Yeah, exactly. If he'd be willing to come on, I think he'd grill me. But no, in general, like I think that's some really powerful stuff, and there's a lot of power and value in that, just to drive yourself as well. Meg, something I wanted to ask you. Because yourself and Mark speak about London, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but you also touched on it here, but it seemed like a place and a time where a lot of change happened for both yourself and Mark, which is incredible, and I love that. Being from London and growing up there, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I've seen it evolve, I've seen it change in many ways, I've seen it... I've seen the impact it's had on me and rubbed off on me as an individual, which I appreciate. Now I'm living somewhere in the South Coast, which is much more quiet, but my girlfriend's Portuguese, so I can respect that connection someone not from the UK or even not from London, but even from the UK has with the city of London. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your time there and also some of the changes that yourself and Mark went through.
Honestly, it was such a dream come true in so many ways. Um, I also think that when I worked at Google and an office I worked in was Tottenham Court Road, and they had on the bus backs these like quotes. And the one that was there, I feel like for the first month that I lived in London, was that when one is tired of London, one is tired of life quote.
Yeah.
That is like, and I just remember thinking like, yes, that's so accurate, because it is, yeah, it's a lot of extremes, and I remember even thinking like the ways that it's opposite to New Zealand in so many ways, like the number of people, the the environment is completely different. It was such a pleasure and a thrill to get to experience that for a while, knowing that we also then had the polar opposite of like, green open spaces and not many people around, which is our kind of daily life now. But I had the privilege of going back to London for the first time in 5 years last year. And what I couldn't believe, we only lived there for 18 months, but it was like a homecoming. And I wandered around, I stayed in the same neighborhood where we lived when we lived in London. We lived in West Hampstead. And so I was doing like the same, commute journey into the city. And it just hums with life. I just absolutely love it. And I couldn't believe how much I still felt like a little part of me belonged there, to the point where I said to Mark, he was home with our kids, and I was like, I can't wait to bring our kids here one day. Like maybe they will get a little taste for it and feel like there's a little place in the world for them in London. And that's kind of what I loved about it was I know I talked a lot about the weather and a good day in London. At the start of this conversation, but actually that's the whole point. It doesn't matter what the weather is because there's always something going on. Whatever you're interested in, it doesn't matter how niche it is. In a city like London, you're going to find other people who are also interested in that, and not just one or two. You can find like hundreds of people who are also into that niche thing. It's kind of like YouTube in the early days, right? Like it
Mm.
was this like you would find your people and find your tribe. I think when I moved to Sydney, it was the first time Mark and I had moved away from New Zealand, and you know, we were slower to make friends there because we didn't realize, we learnt lessons about how to make friends and when you move to a new place. But when we moved to London, we'd had that benefit of knowing that you just say yes to everything for the first few months and doesn't kind of matter if it goes anywhere. And then also because of the dynamics in the Power Platform community connection, where people that, people might have known Mark from the MVP program or from different events over the years, or even just online through different, like through social media and stuff, we found that there was, so many people who were willing to take the time to, meet us and introduce us to people. So that made a huge, huge difference, especially for him, because that was when he started working for our business from home. So he didn't have that safety net that I had of like colleagues and people who were like, kind of just brushing shoulders with in the office every day. And yet I think he has more friends than I do in London.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, as I've mentioned, I think I live in a place called Portsmouth now, and you run out
I've
of
been
things to
there.
do. Have
Yeah.
you? Oh, it's lovely.
Yeah.
I love this place. I don't want to move, but like when you're in London, I just to echo what you said, you don't run out of things to do. And I feel like if I had to take something from my experience there, it's that. Like every week we're going out with friends, there's huge shopping centers, there's places you can go outside, there's everything and more. And I love what you said about the weather, because when the weather's miserable, which can be often in places like London, it kind of adds to it, because in general it's the tradition of it. And when it's sunny, it's lovely because all the green comes out and you can kind of spend more time outside, which is really nice. And I really resonate with that story of, you finding a home there, because I think something people need to do more of if they're not already, because I feel like we're fortunate enough to work in the area of tech where freedom is more accessible, is traveling. Because I think there's nothing like the impact of traveling, even if it's got nothing to do with your job, right? Just going to another country, seeing the culture, seeing the way people live, opening your mind, different languages, experiences. I think shaped me into the person I am. Like, I haven't been to as many places as I would like. The small amount of places I have rubbed off on me in a very positive way. So yeah, honestly, I love the way you speak about travel, you and Mark. And I've got some of the places you've been here: China, Russia, Europe, US, Japan, places on people's bucket lists, and, places I've heard you and Mark both speak about in great
Yeah.
lengths.
It's been I think when you talk, it's the mindset, isn't it? It's the making yourself a bit uncomfortable and leaning into curiosity. You have to practice it. It's like I can remember the first trips we did, we made so many mistakes, like booking hotels in the wrong places or thinking we could, we talked about it like you had said America was bigger than you thought. That was the same thing when we went to Spain. We went to Spain for our honeymoon. And it was like, oh, we'll fly into Madrid because we, big long haul flights from New Zealand, but we really want to be in Barcelona. No worries, we'll just get there and then we'll buy a ticket to Barcelona. Of course, the most expensive way to do it, stayed in an airport hotel instead of staying in the city, even just for one night. Now, when we were in London, we flew so much. In fact, this is such a dumb story. As a humble brag. We lived in West Hampstead, which was the best airport for us was Luton because we could just jump on the Thames link and it was like half an hour. And
Hmm.
EasyJet's home airport is Luton. So we flew so much on EasyJet that I get this email one day and it's like, you've entered the like 5% of flyers and you're now in the special magical EasyJet loyalty club that no one knows about. And actually the benefit was good. It was like you could change the name on a ticket 5 times a year, which
Hmm.
was pretty cool. And they waived change fees, I think, which is great when you like, you know, have paid like £30 for a flight and then you might need to change it.
Yeah.
But that accessibility of travel in places like London, but also Europe and even bringing that mindset of curiosity, it can be just driving down the road half an hour. Like it doesn't have to be reserved for big cultural shifts. You can do that at home. We did that with our kids. They're 2 and 4, and we did a road trip in New Zealand with them last year. And it was cool to see even what it did for their mindsets. And, at that age, there's still a lot of routine and a lot of like, high focus time, and sometimes change can unsettle them, but we could just kind of see their little eyes light up when like things that maybe we would see as like frustrations or inconveniences, they're just fascinated by because it's new to them. So adopting a little bit of that into your travel, whether it's for work or whether it's just doing something with the Easter long weekend, to be able to refresh you and give you a different perspective. Yeah, I still try and do that every day.
Yeah, yeah. And something that I can kind of hear, I'm assuming here because you haven't directly said this, but I feel like you promote a lot of spontaneous things, like, going to Mark or Mark coming to you, just coming and saying, "Hey, let's just go on this trip." Because we've been working hard for X amount of time, and I genuinely feel like there's so much pleasure in that, right? And there's things to be said that it might cost a bit more, etc. But I feel like if we are making money and saving it in the right way, generally people have a savings pot, right? They've got their emergency and then they've got probably their general, which they can dip into when they need to, at least in general, if you can afford that. I was speaking with my girlfriend and she was telling me about someone that she knew, and they basically spent their savings, and I was like, but that situation is what the savings are for, right? That's what you're saving for, because in your bank account, the truth is it's not being 9 times out of 10, it's probably not getting the value that you need, or that you can have within your day-to-day life. So yeah, I love that you promote that.
It comes back to values, right?
Right.
If it's in alignment with your values, then I don't think it's a bad thing.
Mm.
And part of the values, like part of a value of freedom, means that we preserve our freedom, right? So we have the buffer and we have the savings and we have the kind of insurance almost
Mm.
to protect that. So we wouldn't touch that. But you're right. We have a smile account, it's called. This is part of the
Mm.
barefoot investor system in our personal finances. And and it's great because a lot of the time we don't need to touch it. But we just had a scenario recently. Mark's dad actually passed away, and it was a little bit expected, but also meant unexpected travel for some family from Australia. And we had this holiday booked. We do the same. This is the nice thing about getting settled and being home in New Zealand. We do the same holiday every year in summer to this beautiful island just out from Auckland. It's called Waiheke Island. It's wine island. Like, there's playgrounds, everyone's winning. There's wine for us, playgrounds for the kids. Everyone's happy. And it's when I get there, I just feel my whole nervous system relax. It's like time slows down. It's my quintessential Kiwi holiday. I love it. But it just so happened that this was the week that we had booked it. And it turned out actually to be a really beautiful thing because we were able to say to our family that were coming from Australia, like, don't worry, we've got you covered. Like, you've already got to pay the flights to get here. We've got everything. Like, we'll sort the transfers from the airport. We've got your accommodation. We figured out a way to all go together to the funeral on the day that it was. And we just want to look after you because this is something that's important to us. And they, bless them and appreciate them, were like, no, we need to give you money. This isn't right. And I sort of said, I was like, just so you know, like, we're choosing to spend our money in this way because it's more important to us that you feel at home when you come here. And that's in alignment with my values. And you're right. That's exactly what that money is for. That is making me smile. Let me do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I love that. And everyone has their own way of savings, right? And I try and tread lightly when I tell people how to use their money. And that's definitely not what we're doing. But I definitely highly recommend that you align what you've got with your values. And I feel like it always kind of comes back to that same topic, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're so right. And everyone's experiences are different. Everyone has different responsibilities and is coming at it from a different place. So it's only to say that's how I think about it. And I can remember the difference between when I like actively thought about it and learned about finances for myself, not leaning on someone else's understanding or on, just following what I had seen growing up. And this is after being a high earner for a while. A lot of that money was gone. It was just gone. And so it's definitely been a long acquisition of knowledge and learning new habits. Everyone's on their own journey, but I would encourage you to get curious about financial literacy if you're not already, because it has definitely been an important step to that freedom that we've talked about.
Yeah, I love that. And love the way this conversation's evolved, Meg. I mean, we never know what we're gonna get when I kind of come on this podcast and my mind goes crazy and with intrigue and curiosity. I mean, we're coming up to 52 minutes, going into 53. Obviously, I always like to ask this question, and I feel like you'd have such a great perspective on it if you've seen the podcast before, but it's around happiness. So everyone has a different answer, and if you're comfortable answering, I would love to ask you this question, which is, what does happiness mean to you?
I love that question. Happiness to me, this whole thing has been me going off on a tangent, but I'll give you
No,
a tangent.
please.
I used to have this really great friend. He was the first friend I made when I started at Google in Sydney, and we actually lived near each other in the centre of Sydney. So we would walk home together quite often. And we'd play this game. He'd ask me this question, like, imagine you find out tomorrow that you've got 12 months to live. What do you do? I'm 24. I'm all about travel. I haven't been to London yet. I'm like, I've got my, like, I'm off. This was my answer. Yeah. Like, I'm off and I'm going to these places so that I can see them. I'm organizing, life insurance to pay for my niece's education. Like, those are the kinds of things, right, that I'm wanting to do. And then the trick of the thought exercise is, well, what's stopping you from doing any of that stuff right now? And again, I guess that was the first starting to think about, what do you value and are you living in alignment with it? And then I did that exercise recently with some girlfriends of mine. We go on these like mum retreats where we just like go find like a cabin in the woods and we take our books and we take our wine and we like have this like, rejuvenation time. And I said that to them and we all kind of looked at each other and we were like, I do exactly what I do every day. Like I do what I'm doing already because we were like, we're in work that we love. We would spend more time with our kids, but we're also like kind of looking at each other going, we spend a lot of really good quality time with our kids. Um, we were kind of like, we'd record video messages. That's what it would be. We're like, for our kids at different ages in their lives. But that to me was this realization of, if my 20s were characterized by yearning and striving, my 30s are characterized by really living each day well. And sometimes that means being really productive and ambitious and the, entrepreneurial stretch goal stuff we've been talking about. And sometimes the happiness is dropping everything and just sitting on the floor and playing Lego with my kids. Or
Yeah.
actually also sometimes we've got to talk about it too, that like sometimes it's like, actually, I just need time for me. I need to take my book. I need to go and lie in my hammock or I need to go for a walk and climb a mountain. Like it's happiness for me is freedom to spend it, doing the things I value.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that answer. And I think for me, something I really struggled with for a long time, I don't nowadays, but it's sleep. I used to like go off on like 2 to 3 hours of sleep. I wouldn't be able to sleep. It was very difficult for me, and I'd have to kind of live the day like that. Um, and it turned out to be, it was physical, but it was also a lot of it was mental. So going to bed every night and stressing that I didn't get enough done the day that the in the day that happened and those types of things. A really good thought exercise for me was to kind of just sit down and I write it on that whiteboard over there and I just say, hey, like you gave it your best. And I think that's what's important here. And it's a little bit cringe because you say, all right, but my best isn't getting me far enough and I got to do better. And all of that stuff is fine. But when it's time to sleep, it's time to sleep. And I think keeping that in my mind every night before bed is really important to me. And I think it really fuels the rest of the day. And it's a bit of a long winded answer to say that's kind of what I'm exploring with happiness as well. And you mentioned freedom too. And I feel like that's so, so important in aligning with your values. So yeah, there's definitely a lot
Yeah.
there to unpick, Meg.
Rest is productive is a good frame that I've found helpful when I've been in that. But you've got to do more. You've got to do more.
Mm,
Rest is actually helping you achieve what you're trying to achieve.
hmm
So yeah, I love that, and I've found it really helpful. My sleep has improved since getting an Aura ring. I'm now in
I've
the
heard of
club.
those. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
So how are
I
they?
was, yeah, cool. So they are not cheap. I think it's like
Yeah.
$500. So it's
hmm
quite spenny. But I was considering an Apple Watch and I decided to get this instead because I've had an Apple Watch before and I didn't really use it. And I kind of don't need the like pings of notifications on my phone or anything. And I was like, but I was focusing in on my sleep and trying to improve it. And I had seen and sort of read that it was really helpful to, yeah, to like you can wake up in the morning and you can kind of see how your sleep was. And it gives you like practical advice based on your heart rate and temperature changes and all sorts of stuff. So I think I've had it for about a month and I really, really like it already. But a bunch of the stuff sort of kicks in, especially for women because it tracks your cycles and things like that. It will kick in after 2 months.
Mm,
So I think even just having that awareness of what helps you have a better sleep. And you don't need a ring to tell you that. But, what time you're going to bed and how you're winding down and even those thought processes, right? Like shutting off your mind, giving yourself permission to rest, thinking about something that's gone well. When I've been really anxious in my life, one thing that I found that is a great like reset is gratitudes. So
mm.
we do them with our kids. Actually, our little boy, he's often like, "I want to play gratitudes," which is so like maybe a little bit cringe, but I love it. And we would, it actually came out of some of that like really hard, like grieving and anxiety ridden times where it kind of feels like the whole world's out of control. So Mark and I had this thing quite early on where we could kind of trigger to each other, okay, 5 gratitudes, go. And we go one for one. And it's crazy how quickly it calms your nervous system to
Mm.
focus on something that you're grateful for. Um, and so that's become a little bit of a shortcut between us as well. And it's nice to be able to share that now as a little family.
Yeah, I love that. And I relate to that because something I used to do with my girlfriend when we were early on is before we'd go to bed, I'd be like, give me 3 things you're grateful for. And I'd make her list it. I don't do it anymore. I probably should do it more, but I never took the time for myself and thought of the 3 things I was grateful for until she would ask it back. But I think there's a lot of power in that. And honestly, Meg, grief scares me a lot. I'm not the oldest person, even though I probably look it. But
You
in
do not.
general, in general, if I'm being completely honest right now, and touch wood, nothing happened. I've seen grief, but I've never experienced it personally. I've seen people around me that I love struggle, with loss of parents and loss of close relatives, but nothing's really hit me that hard in terms of, those relatives I didn't really have a connection with or I didn't speak to. They were in Kurdistan, which is kind of where my heritage is from, or kind of otherwise. But it does scare me a lot. So I think experiencing that at a young age, I'm sure shaped you in a lot of ways. And you spoke about the book, and I think there's a lot of power in that and coming back from it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It has shaped me, but also, whenever I talk to anyone that might be going through grief, or even if I think about myself, how I treated myself, the biggest thing I would say is to give yourself grace and that
Mm,
there's no rule book for it. Like there's no set number of days that you're allowed to grieve. That it is really personal and yet it's universal. So there will be people who will understand what you're going through um, when you do. But also, I think the main thing is that thing we can all kind of learn as well, which is no day is guaranteed. And so if you can do your best to have a great day today, what does that look like?
yeah.
Um, that's a way to focus on controlling what you can.
Yeah, I love that. And Meg, the happiness question is usually my last question. But just before we log off, just because you and Mark have helped so many people with your challenge, I'd like to close it off with this. If there's one thing you see often in the challenge, or one thing that people need to hear repetitively in the challenge, what is that thing that they need to hear that you'd leave them with in this episode?
I think the main thing I'd say to anyone is to believe that you have something unique to offer and that is worth offering. And whether it's through the challenge, we talk about books, we've talked about a lot of them today. Start looking for content and information that helps you articulate the unique value that you add. And in our context, we're talking about in the Power Platform and the Dynamics community. But just generally being able to own and articulate your unique value and talent will get you so far in life because once you do that, you'll be surprised at how obvious it becomes to you and other people where your path might go. And you'll find choice open up before you that you've never maybe even dreamed of for yourself. But I very strongly believe, and I've seen it over and over again, that everyone's perspective is valuable. It just starts with that belief in yourself that your perspective and unique combination of experiences is valuable.
Yeah, and when I get into mentoring calls, it's always the first thing I say. Everyone's got a story to tell, and honestly, 90% of people I get into a call with, they're like, I want this, X, higher salary, more freedom, MVP, whatever, but I don't know, like, kind of how to do. Can I get a roadmap? I'm like, just start. like start being authentic, put yourself out there. No one can find you. If I Google your name, is it out there? Are you sharing your perspective? Are you sharing your story? And a lot of that is because they don't believe that they've got something to share. Like, it's crazy. These people have 30 years of experiences and they think everything that they have to put out there is technical. And there's a part of that, 100%. But I think knowing that with that comes more, your story, the way it shaped you, the lessons you took from that, and then applying it to the technical stuff in the Power Platform as an example. There's a lot of power in that, and I found a lot of power in that. So yeah, really powerful stuff, Meg. Thank you. Okay, so last thing before we wrap up, I love to leave kind of the last point of the episode for my guest to kind of roll out the red carpet for themselves, let the people know what you're up to, let the people know where they can find you. The floor is yours, Meg.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be traveling back to Europe next month. So that'll be May for Dynamics Minds. So that's in Slovenia, which it will be my first time attending. Mark went last year. We're both coming this year, which will be really cool. So if you're going to be there, let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn, Meg Smith. And then for the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, you'll find all the details at 90daymc.com. Or you can just message me because I'm always happy to take questions about that as well.
Amazing. Likewise. And everything Meg mentioned will be in the description, including the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, which I highly recommend myself. So you got to check it out. Meg, you've been a wonderful guest. This has been one of my favorite episodes. Thank you so much for coming on.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.